It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. Steven Seagal had arrived in a small rural town for a charity appearance. Nothing fancy, no red carpets, no security detail. Just Steven, in a simple black jacket, sunglasses, and that calm, unbothered walk he was known for. He was heading toward the community center, stopping every now and then to greet locals who recognized him from a distance but weren't bold enough to approach. As he crossed the street, a police cruiser rolled up beside him. The tires screeched slightly, not because of danger, but because of attitude. The officer inside, a young man with a chip on his shoulder, stared at Steven like he was sizing up trouble. He didn't recognize him. All he saw was a tall, confident stranger who didn't look intimidated by authority. The officer stepped out, slamming the car door harder than necessary. "Hey, you," he barked. "Yeah, you with the shades. You think you can just walk around ignoring me?" Steven slowly took off his sunglasses, calm as ever. "I'm not ignoring you, officer. Just heading to an event." The officer scoffed. "Oh, so you can talk back? Great. Let me see your ID." Steven raised an eyebrow, slightly amused. "Is there a problem?" The officer stepped closer, chest puffed out. "I ask the questions here. You answer. That's how it works in this town." People nearby began slowing down, sensing tension. A few recognized Steven, their eyes widened, whispering quietly, but the officer didn't notice. His focus was locked on proving dominance. Steven kept his voice level and respectful. "Officer, I don't want any trouble. I'm just passing through." "That's what they all say," the officer snapped. "You look suspicious. You look like someone trying to start something. Don't test me." Steven exhaled slowly, the calm before a storm. "I assure you, I'm not here to cause any issues." But the officer misread that calmness as defiance. He jabbed a finger toward Steven's chest. "Don't get smart with me. I'm giving you one more chance. Show me your ID, or this becomes a different kind of conversation." The small crowd grew silent. Phones began recording. Because no one, not even the officer, had any idea that what Steven said next would change everything, the tension in the street thickened like fog. The officer stood rigid, hand hovering near his cuffs, waiting for Steven to make one wrong move. Steven, unfazed, reached calmly into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out his ID. He extended it forward with 2 fingers. But before Steven could even hand it over, the officer slapped his hand away. "I told you not to get smart with me," he barked, stepping forward aggressively. The crowd gasped. A woman whispered, "Is he crazy?" "That's Steven Seagal." But her voice was swallowed by the officer's ego-fueled shouting. Steven remained perfectly still, expression unreadable. His years of discipline, training, and government work had taught him one thing: never escalate unless absolutely necessary. "Officer," Steven said in a low, even tone, "there's no need for hostility. I'm complying." The officer laughed sharply. "Complying? You think you can talk back and then pretend you're the calm one? You think you're better than me?" Steven tilted his head slightly. "I never said that." "Oh, but your face said it," the officer snapped. "Your attitude said it. I asked a simple question and you acted like you're above the law." The crowd grew restless. Phones lifted higher. Someone whispered, "This guy has no idea who he's messing with." The officer kept ranting, his voice growing louder with every sentence. "You walk into my town thinking you can disrespect me? You think your sunglasses and leather jacket make you tough? This isn't Hollywood." Steven blinked slowly, patience thinning but still intact. "I'm not trying to disrespect you," he said. "I'm simply on my way to a charity event. That's all." The officer stepped closer until they were nearly chest to chest. "You know what? I've had enough. Turn around. Now." Hands behind your head. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Steven raised his brows. "You're arresting me? For what?" "For talking back," the officer growled. "For acting suspicious. For resisting authority. Pick one, or pick all 3. Steven inhaled lightly, as if centering himself. "Officer, think about what you're doing." But the officer wasn't thinking anymore. His ego had taken full control. He grabbed Steven's wrist and twisted it behind his back. In one swift, reckless motion, he slapped cold steel handcuffs on Steven Seagal, one of the most trained martial artists on the planet, like he was some street punk causing trouble. Phones across the sidewalk immediately started recording. Steven didn't fight, didn't flinch. He let it happen, because he knew exactly how this would end. The officer shoved him toward the patrol car. "You're done. In my town, you learn respect the hard way. Steven glanced over his shoulder, eyes calm but sharp. Respect works both ways. The officer scoffed. Oh, you'll respect me real soon. A man from the crowd yelled. Officer, that's Steven Seagal. Are you insane? But the officer dismissed him with a wave. Yeah? And I'm the president, he mocked, rolling his eyes. Laughter rippled awkwardly through the crowd, but no one was truly laughing. People were shocked, confused, almost afraid of what they were witnessing. The officer pushed Steven against the hood of the car, tightening the cuffs just a little too much. Keep talking, the officer hissed. See what happens. But Steven Seagal simply lifted his head and looked at the crowd, calm, centered, and completely unshaken. Because he knew one thing the officer didn't. One phone call was about to change the course of both their lives forever. The patrol car door slammed shut behind Steven Seagal, but even with his hands cuffed and his freedom momentarily taken, he sat with the calmness of a monk. His breathing never changed. His expression never faltered. The officer, meanwhile, strutted around like he had just captured the world's most dangerous criminal. People gathered around the police car, filming, whispering, arguing about what they had just witnessed. Bro, that's literally Steven Seagal, someone muttered. Does that officer want to get fired? Another asked. But the officer ignored everything. He yanked the driver's door open, sat down, and snapped. Don't even think about talking. You lost that right when you mouthed off. Steven turned his head slightly. I haven't lost anything, he said quietly. The officer slammed the divider with his fist. Shut up. If you say one more word, I'll add another charge. Steven looked forward again, unbothered. I'm giving you a chance to fix your mistake. The officer let out a short, mocking laugh. Fix it. You're the one in cuffs. You think you're special? Steven didn't answer. Not yet. The officer smirked, threw the car into gear, and pulled away from the curb, only to stop when his radio crackled. Unit 14, what's your status on that detainment? The dispatcher asked. Suspect is in custody, the officer said smugly. Identify the suspect. The officer grinned. Some wannabe tough guy who thinks he's somebody. Says his name is Steven Seagal. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then the dispatcher's tone changed completely. Unit 14, confirm. Did you say Steven Seagal? As in the Steven Seagal. The officer rolled his eyes and pressed the button again. That's what he claims. Probably some idiot who watches too many action movies. Another silence. Then, Unit 14, hold position. Do not move the suspect. Command wants clarification. Command? The officer repeated, suddenly confused. For what? It's just a... He was cut off by a voice he didn't recognize. Deep. Serious. Military. Officer Jenkins. This is Colonel Davis. You will release Mr. Seagal immediately. The officer blinked. Then he burst into laughter. You've got to be kidding me. Colonel who? Is this a prank? Steven finally spoke. It's not a prank. The officer turned around sharply. You did this. Steven nodded once. I told you. I'm giving you a chance to fix your mistake. The radio crackled again, firmer this time. Officer Jenkins, listen carefully. You have detained a federal defense consultant. Stand by. Pentagon is on the line. The officer froze. Pentagon. Sweat formed at his hairline. His hands trembled just slightly. Before he could process what was happening, another voice came through. This one crisp, authoritative, unmistakably high-ranking. Officer Jenkins, this is General Hawthorne. Mr. Seagal is under federal protection and currently listed as an active asset. You have committed an unlawful detainment and potential interference with government operations. The officer's eyes widened. Active asset? Steven watched him silently. You are ordered, the general continued, to release him immediately, remove the restraints, and await internal affairs for further instruction. The officer swallowed hard. I didn't know. He was being disrespectful. He is a civilian advisor to multiple agencies, the general snapped. And he outranks you in every way that matters. The officer's throat tightened. I didn't mean. Release him. Now. The radio went silent. Steven leaned his head slightly. You see now? This could have gone very differently. The officer scrambled out of the patrol car, almost tripping over himself. He flung the door open, fumbling with the handcuff key like someone trying to defuse a bomb. Mr. Seagal, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought you were just what? Steven asked calmly as the cuffs clicked open. The officer froze at the question, his face drained of color. The crowd, still recording, watched the officer's humiliation unfold like a scene from a movie. Steven rubbed his wrists lightly, more out of habit than discomfort. You judged before you listened. That's a dangerous mistake for a man in your job. I'm terribly sorry, the officer whispered. But Steven wasn't finished. You humiliated me in front of the public, he said quietly. Not because I did something wrong, but because your ego got bruised. The officer lowered his eyes, chest rising and falling with shaky breaths. Steven stepped closer. You wanted to teach someone a lesson about respect, he said. But respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. The officer blinked hard, fighting tears. Before Steven could say anything else, a black SUV screeched around the corner. Two men in suits stepped out, badges flashing. Mr. Seagal, we're here to escort you, one of them said respectfully. They didn't even spare the officer a glance. Steven walked toward the SUV, but before getting in, he turned back. One phone call, he said softly. That's all it took. The officer nodded weakly. I know. And that call, Steven added, just ended your career. The officer's knees buckled slightly. Steven got into the SUV. The door shut, and with that, the car rolled away, leaving behind a broken officer, a shocked crowd, and a story that would echo through that small town for decades. The moment Steven Seagal's SUV disappeared around the corner, the street fell into a strange, uncomfortable silence. The crowd didn't disperse right away. People stood frozen, phones still raised, as if expecting the officer to explain the disaster they had just witnessed. Officer Jenkins didn't say a word. He just stared at his empty hands, the same hands that had cuffed Steven Seagal minutes earlier, now trembling uncontrollably. A teenage boy stepped forward, camera still recording. Officer, are you good? Jenkins didn't respond. His breaths came shallow, uneven. He couldn't believe what had happened. One moment he thought he was asserting authority. The next, the Pentagon was threatening him with federal charges. Two more patrol cars pulled up at the scene, lights flashing. A senior sergeant stepped out, confused by the cluster of civilians. What happened here? He demanded. A woman pointed her phone straight at Jenkins. Your boy just arrested Steven Seagal for no reason. The sergeant blinked. Steven Seagal? The Steven Seagal. The crowd erupted into overlapping voices. He handcuffed him. He was profiling him. He kept yelling at him for nothing. Pentagon called and tore him apart. The sergeant's jaw dropped. He slowly turned toward Jenkins. Is this true? Jenkins squeezed his hands into fists, trying desperately to steady himself. He was being disrespectful. I asked for ID. He wouldn't cooperate. I didn't know who he was. That's exactly the problem, the sergeant snapped. You're supposed to assess situations, not escalate them until federal agencies intervene. The crowd murmured louder, sensing that the real show was just beginning. The sergeant grabbed Jenkins by the arm and pulled him aside. What were you thinking? He hissed. Do you realize what you've done? The Pentagon doesn't just jump on the radio unless something serious happened. Jenkins swallowed hard. I didn't know he was important. Important? The sergeant echoed sarcastically. He's a federal consultant and one of the most recognizable action stars on the planet. Jenkins opened his mouth to respond, but a new voice cut through the air, cold, official, and devastating. Officer Jenkins? Everyone turned as Internal Affairs stepped out of one of the patrol cars. Two stern-faced investigators in gray suits approached, badges raised. Jenkins felt his stomach collapse. We've been ordered to escort you to headquarters for immediate questioning, one investigator said. Jenkins blinked in confusion. Right now? Yes, the investigator said. And I suggest you cooperate. You're involved in a federal incident. The crowd gasped. Jenkins forced out a shaky breath. Can I at least explain my side? You'll have your chance, the investigator replied. But for now, you're relieved of duty pending review. The sergeant closed his eyes in disappointment. Give me your badge, Jenkins. The words hit Jenkins harder than any punch. He stared at his badge, a symbol of authority, identity, purpose, the thing he'd worked years to earn. His hand shook violently as he unpinned it and placed it in the sergeant's open palm. Phones were recording from every angle. Someone whispered, "He's done. He messed with the wrong guy." Jenkins tried to hold on to any remaining shred of dignity. "I was doing my job," he muttered weakly. "No, the sergeant said firmly. You were feeding your ego, and it blew up in your face. The investigators motioned him toward their car. As Jenkins walked, the crowd parted in two lines, not out of respect, but out of disbelief. Some crossed their arms. Others shook their heads. A few smirked, knowing they had captured everything on camera. A little kid tugged his mother's sleeve. Mom, is he going to jail? Jenkins heard it. The question stung more than the cuffs he'd slapped on Steven earlier. He paused before entering the IA vehicle, staring at the ground as if wishing it would swallow him whole. Then he looked up and saw the last thing he needed to see. A bystander holding up his phone with the video already titled, Cop arrests Steven Seagal for no reason. Pentagon calls him live. The thumbnail showed Jenkins placing cuffs on Steven. The video already had 4,000 views, and it had been online for less than 5 minutes. Jenkins felt his breath hitch. His career wasn't just in danger. It was turning into a public spectacle. The investigator opened the back door. Officer Jenkins, get in. With nothing left to cling to, Jenkins stepped inside. The door shut, and for the first time all day, he realized he wasn't in control of anything anymore. By the time Steven Seagal arrived at the community center, news of the incident had already spread like wildfire. Volunteers whispered nervously, phones lit up with notifications, and local reporters swarmed the sidewalk like vultures sensing a headline. But Steven wasn't rushing inside to hide. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shaken. He simply stepped out of the black SUV, adjusted his jacket, and walked forward with the same stoic calmness he had carried his entire life. The two federal agents flanked him quietly, clearing a small path through the crowd. Someone shouted, Mr. Seagal, is it true you were arrested? Another yelled, did the officer really handcuff you for talking back? Steven lifted a hand, not to silence them, but to invite patience. Reporters froze. Cameras zoomed in. Steven finally spoke. I wasn't arrested, he said steadily. I was misjudged. The crowd leaned closer. His voice was calm, but every word felt heavy. I don't blame the officer, he continued. But I do blame the mindset that made him assume force was the right option. A murmur rippled through the reporters. Steven turned his gaze toward the cameras. When you wear a badge, you don't get to act from fear. You don't get to act from ego. You act from responsibility. Behind him, even the federal agents stood a little straighter. This wasn't about me, Steven said. It's about something much bigger. Phones shook in hands as people realized this moment was about to go viral. A man in uniform should be the first person to listen, he continued, not the first to escalate. A reporter called out, do you think he should be fired? Steven paused. He didn't want revenge. That wasn't who he was. No, he said after a long moment. I don't think he should be fired. The crowd gasped. I think he should be taught, Steven added. Corrected. Guided. Because destroying a man for one mistake doesn't fix the system. But fixing the system prevents the next mistake. The air itself changed, as if everyone exhaled at once. Steven stepped closer to the microphones. When I told the officer he was making a mistake, it wasn't a threat. It was a warning to himself. He looked into the nearest camera, his eyes steady and strong. Authority is not power. Authority is duty. A wave of applause broke out from the civilians nearby. Even the reporters, supposed to stay neutral, couldn't help but nod. One young girl in the crowd, maybe 11 years old, raised her hand timidly. Mr. Seagal, were you scared? Steven softened, his expression shifting from stern to gentle. No, he said, smiling faintly. But my fear has never been for myself. He glanced up at the crowd. It's for people who don't have the privilege of being recognized. People who get mistreated and no general steps in to save them. People whose stories never reach the Pentagon. Silence. Painfully deep silence. So if this moment becomes something, Steven said, let it become a reminder. Not of my name, but of what should never happen to anyone. A reporter stepped closer. What will you do now? Steven didn't hesitate. I'll speak where I can. I'll help where I should. And I'll stand with anyone who experiences injustice, whether or not there's a camera recording it. Someone near the front wiped tears from their eyes. Then Steven added something no one expected. And I hope that officer learns from this. Because the world doesn't need more fear. He folded his hands respectfully. The world needs more understanding. Applause broke out again, louder this time, echoing off the nearby buildings. Even the agents behind him exchanged glances. They had seen Steven in action before, but this level of quiet leadership left them speechless. The crowd surged closer, not with anger, but with admiration. A teenager shouted, "We support you, Steven." Another yelled, "Respect." The chant spread like wildfire. "Respect, respect, respect." Steven bowed his head slightly, humbled. But before he could speak again, one of the federal agents stepped up and whispered something urgent in his ear. Steven nodded. He stepped back from the microphones. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you. But there's something I must attend to." Reporters immediately began shouting questions, but Steven didn't answer. He walked calmly toward the black SUV. Because while the world was praising his grace and strength, Officer Jenkins' entire career and future was unraveling behind closed doors. And Steven knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Officer Jenkins had been in interrogation rooms before, but never on the wrong side of the table. He sat with his shoulders hunched, palms sweating, eyes fixed on the floor. The sterile gray walls felt like they were closing in. A single camera in the corner blinked red, recording every terrified breath he took. Across from him, two internal affairs investigators flipped through a thick file, thicker than Jenkins expected. Inside were screenshots, civilian complaints, body cam reports he forgot even existed, and now, the video of him handcuffing Steven Seagal. The senior investigator leaned back in his chair. "Officer Jenkins," he began, "this incident did not happen in isolation." Jenkins swallowed hard. What do you mean? I've been a good officer." The investigator slid a stack of papers toward him. Excessive force complaint, verbal aggression complaint, improper procedure, profiling reports. Those were misunderstandings. Jenkins stammered. "People overreact." The investigator's expression didn't change. Quite a pattern of misunderstandings. Jenkins's breath quickened. The second investigator folded his hands calmly. "You didn't just arrest a celebrity today. You arrested a federal defense consultant. Without cause. You ignored calm, lawful behavior and escalated the situation. That is why we are here." Jenkins shook his head, his voice cracking. "I didn't know who he was." "That," the investigator replied sharply, "is the entire point." Jenkins flinched. The first investigator hit a remote, and a TV mounted on the wall turned on. A video played. It was Steven's speech from the community center, already at 1.2 million views. The room filled with Steven Seagal's calm, steady voice. "A badge is not a weapon for your ego. Authority is not power. Authority is duty." Every word hit Jenkins like a punch to the chest. The investigator paused the video right on the moment Steven said, "You judge before you listen. Public opinion is leaning heavily against you," the investigator said. "Your department is under national scrutiny, and the Pentagon has filed a formal complaint." Jenkins felt the room tilt. Am I going to be fired?" he whispered. The investigator opened a new folder, this one thin but deadly. "We're recommending termination," he said bluntly. "Effective immediately." Jenkins's lips parted, but no sound came out. But this is my life," he whispered. "Everything I've worked for." "You abused your authority," the investigator said. "You were warned twice by dispatch and still escalated." Jenkins squeezed his eyes shut. "I thought he was disrespectful. I thought that he challenged your authority," the investigator finished. "That is not an arrestable offense." Jenkins shook his head violently. "I can be better. I'll go through training again. I'll apologize. It's not just today," the investigator interrupted. "It's the pattern." Jenkins's voice dropped to a fragile whisper. "So that's it. My career is gone." No one answered, because the answer was obvious. At that moment, a knock came at the door. The chief of police entered, his face pale, stiff, exhausted. He had clearly spent hours on the phone with the Pentagon, the mayor, senators, and half the country's media outlets. He closed the door and sat down directly in front of Jenkins. "Eric," the chief began quietly, "I vouch for you. I told them you were a good cop, that you just made a mistake." Jenkins raised his eyes, full of hope. "But," the chief continued, his voice tightening, "they sent me the video." Jenkins closed his eyes. "And I watched it," the chief said slowly. "Not as your chief. As a stranger. As a citizen." Jenkins looked up, tears forming. "And Eric," the chief's voice cracked. "What I saw, I couldn't defend." Jenkins's throat constricted. "I didn't mean to. You humiliated a man who was calm and respectful. the chief said firmly. You escalated without reason. You abused your authority. Jenkins covered his face with both hands. The chief placed a small envelope on the table. Inside was a single paper. His termination. Sign it, the chief said softly. It's better than the alternative. Jenkins's head jerked up. What alternative? Federal charges, the investigator replied. Silence. Cold, suffocating silence. With trembling fingers, Jenkins opened the envelope and stared at the termination form. I never wanted to hurt anyone, he whispered. I thought being tough meant being respected. The chief's voice softened. Respect isn't something you force. It's something you earn. The same words Steven had spoken. Jenkins broke. Tears streamed down his face as he picked up the pen. He hesitated, then signed. The chief stood up slowly, lingering for a moment before placing a hand on the officer's shoulder. I hope you learn from this, he said gently. Because the world is watching. They left him alone. Jenkins sat in the empty room, his career shattered, his reputation destroyed, and the echoes of Steven Seagal's calm voice replaying in his mind. By sunrise the next morning, the world had already decided what happened. The video of Officer Jenkins handcuffing Steven Seagal, the confusion, the arrogance, the Pentagon call, had exploded across every platform imaginable. Millions watched it, millions shared it, and millions commented on what it meant. But what shocked people the most was not the confrontation. It was Steven Seagal's speech. Clips of him saying, "Authority is not power. Authority is duty," were trending globally. Hashtags like #respect, #listen before you act, and #Seagal speech dominated social media. Politicians quoted him, activists praised him, and everyday citizens felt seen and represented. The story wasn't just viral. It had become a movement. Meanwhile, Jenkins sat alone at home. He hadn't slept. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing, not with support, but with messages from people he'd never met. Angry comments, news alerts, videos, memes, articles. He turned his phone face down, unable to look at the avalanche of criticism. The badge he once wore with pride lay on his kitchen table, now nothing more than a piece of metal reminding him of how quickly arrogance can destroy a career. He whispered to himself, "What have I done?" But there were no answers. Not anymore. Steven, however, was thousands of miles away. After the event concluded, he boarded a plane with federal agents to discuss security protocols in Washington. But even on the flight attendants approached him quietly. "Mr. Seagal," one said shyly, "what you said yesterday, thank you. My brother was profiled once. You spoke for all of us." Steven bowed his head, humbled. "I only said what needed to be heard," he replied. Another attendant added softly, "You didn't attack the officer, you taught him. That's real strength." Steven didn't respond. He didn't speak for praise. He spoke because silence was worse. By the time he landed, the world was roaring. News reporters were waiting. Camera flashes erupted like fireworks. People held signs. Respect is power. Listen, then act. Seagal stood up for all of US. One young man pushed to the front of the crowd, tears on his cheeks. "My dad was arrested for nothing," he said. "They treated him like a criminal. Thank you. Thank you for showing the world what happens when someone finally stands up." Steven rested a hand on the man's shoulder. "No one deserves mistreatment," he said. "Not your father. Not anyone." The crowd cheered, chanting again. "Respect. Respect. Respect." Back in the small town, something unexpected happened. People began leaving notes outside the police station. Some were angry. Some were sad. Some were hopeful. One note read, "We don't hate you, Officer Jenkins. We just hope you learn." Another said, "Authority is responsibility. We expect better." But one note made Jenkins break down completely. It was written by a little girl with uneven handwriting. "Police are heroes. Please be one again." Jenkins pressed the note to his chest and cried harder than he ever had in his life. Because for the first time, he understood what Steven meant. Not anger, not revenge, correction. Then came the official verdict. The department held a press conference. Cameras lined every inch of the space. The chief spoke. "Officer Jenkins has been terminated effective immediately. In addition, all officers in the department will undergo mandatory training in de-escalation, profiling prevention, and communication protocols." Reporters exploded with questions. But the chief continued. "And in honor of Mr. Steven Seagal's request, we will not seek criminal charges. Instead, we will work toward rebuilding trust with our community. The room murmured. It was over. Not with punishment, but with change. Real change. Steven delivered the final message the world needed to hear. Standing on a stage before thousands, cameras flashing, microphones lined up, he took a breath and said, "What happened to me can happen to anyone. Today, it got attention because of who I am. But tomorrow, it could be someone without a voice. So let today be a warning, but also a lesson." His voice grew stronger. Do not judge by appearance. Do not act from ego. Do not use authority to intimidate. Use it to protect. That's what the uniform is for. The crowd erupted. Steven raised one last message. If you believe every human deserves respect, say it with me. A wave rolled through the crowd, millions online joining in. Respect, respect, respect. It became the biggest chant of the year. If you believe no one should be judged by appearance, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories like this one.